Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to my channel, True Crime and Beauty on Tuesdays. My name is Leah, and I'm so glad that you guys are returning back to my channel. If you're new here, then it's just welcome, and I'm glad that you guys have decided to check out my channel. My channel is about true crime, and I go through a case and while I do my makeup. As for today's case, I'm going to go ahead and post out a warning that at times this can be extremely graphic, and it is dealing with people like 27 and under that ended up being assaulted and killed. It will have some maybe triggering things. If this is triggering for you, please go ahead and clip out of here and maybe catch me in the next video. Otherwise, let's go ahead and get started. For a long time, people have thought of clowns as kind of creepy when they're supposed to be something fun and enjoyable for like a children's party or a adult party or whatever, really. But not always are the clowns friendly out of their costume or even in their costume sometimes. This particular person, who was portrayed in American Horror Story not once but twice. He was the inspiration for Twisty the Clown, and also he was flat out portrayed by an actor in Devil's Night in the AHS Hotel. And the person I am talking about is John Wayne Gacy. This guy was quite horrific. Yes, he has passed on now, thankfully. Try to get as much evil out of the world as we can. He had some alter egos. One was Pogo the Clown, and which he would dress up as a clown and do nice things like go to hospitals and check on sickly children and go check on elderly and be very nice to the elderly. So, and then in the other side, he was a cold-blooded killer. Now, I am using Milani on my brows. And I will also be using the NYX Brow Glue. I will try to go through and tell you everything that I'm using as I use it. If I missed something, I'm sorry. Go ahead and ask me in DM on Instagram or down in the comments section. While trying to maintain truth to this story and accuracy, I am also going to try to clip it down because I did a whole lot of research, so I have a lot to talk about. But if I take it and put it all into a thing, it's going to be like a 4 or 5 part series. So I'm just going to try to give you what you need to understand and then move forward and then continue on in the storyline. John Wayne Gacy was born March 17, 1942 in Edgewater Hospital in Chicago, Illinois. He was the second of 3 children. The other 2 children were girls, so he was the only boy in 3 children. His father was John Stanley Gacy, and he was like a repairman, kind of like he could do kind of a lot of things with his hands and things like that. He was also a World War I veteran. His mother was Marion Elaine Robison, and of course probably Gacy being married and all of that. And she was an at-home mom. She was a homemaker, enjoyed being at home with the children, which was not uncommon, especially during that time frame. We're going to go ahead and use some Too Faced Eye Insurance Primer. John's father was said to be he was an alcoholic, but he wasn't just any type of alcoholic. He was an abusive alcoholic. He wasn't like one of those happy drunks that you just kind of enjoy being around. Nope. And he took it out on everyone. It is said that he really didn't take it out on the daughters, but he did take it out on John and also his wife, Marion. It's very sad to hear. For eyeshadow today, we're going to go ahead and use the ColourPop Melt For You little 5 eyeshadows, super cute. Like I said, I have a lot of stuff I just haven't used, so I'm really excited to start delving into all this stuff. Well, back to John. John was like a sickly kid, so it wasn't really what his dad had envisioned of having a son, and he wasn't exactly understanding of that either. He was like, he would call him like a punk and a sissy and things like that, you know, real supportive dad and all. And it was just John who had to just deal with that. There are some recollections that John was severely beaten by his dad at times in the basement of his house, you know, the family home. And that does bounce back and forth as to being true or not true. So it's kind of just speculation. I'm going to put that out there because it was never really proven if that happened or not. So as he was growing, he didn't have like this great childhood. He wasn't growing up like, oh, my dad's supportive, my mom's supportive, everything's so great. I mean, we all have our trials and tribulations growing up and even into adulthood and throughout our whole life. But some of us just have more than others. And John had a lot on his plate when it came to them. And so he never really felt like he got the real, like, approval of his dad. It didn't stop John from wanting to achieve, like, the regular, all-around happy life that he kind of portrayed or wanted to portray for his own life. He had goals. He had things that he was in his head and that he wanted to achieve. And he wasn't going to let anything that his dad said stop him, which is good. You know, if you have goals, good goals, you should go along with it. He would later state that he just never felt like he was a masculine type of person or kid. He was kind of pudgy, and there's nothing wrong with being pudgy, but this is how he felt because I was watching some of the things and him talking about it, and he just never felt like a masculine guy, and his dad calling him a sissy probably didn't help. He did end up getting married twice, and his first marriage was to Marilyn Myers, and that lasted about 5 years or so, but they did have 2 children together. And I know we're talking about this guy as a monster, but it does not state anywhere that he was abusive to his children at all. He had a boy and a girl with Marilyn, and one was named Michael and the other was Christine. He actually, in fact, stated that he loved being a father. His marriage to Marilyn ended when he got arrested and put into prison for sodomy on a young man. He was actually served divorce papers when he got into jail. And he never, from what I understand, he never saw his kids again. His biological kids again. During that time that he was married to Marilyn, though, her dad owned like 2 or 3 Kentucky Fried Chickens, and he became the manager of them, which his dad was proud of him for that. And that was pretty much the only part that his dad was proud of. I mean, I'm sure he was proud of grandkids and stuff like that. I mean, who isn't? He waited a little while. He waited 3 years and ended up reconnecting with an old flame from high school. Her name was Carol. And Carol was a divorcee and already had 2 children of her own, 2 daughters. Again, I know it's cringeworthy when we stop and we think, ooh, we're putting kids in this. Oh. No, it never states that he had any type of negative relations with those children, which I am really glad to hear about. And I hope that he never did have any kind of negative relations with those children. He did enough harm in his lifetime. So once he got with Carol, they didn't really waste a lot of time messing around. So he moved them into his house and then ended up getting engaged, getting married, and all of that. So he was back to his happy family kind of thing. And yeah, he really did enjoy being a happy family man. So he's back, you know, there are pictures. It showed, you know, that he used to have like these lavish barbecues and everybody wanted to be there. And he would have themes to them like the 4th of July where people would dress up like, you know, I saw some pictures of him dressed up like Paul Revere and things like that. But, you know, during this time he also was part of the JC Club, and he was also part of like the Democratic something club, I can't remember. But these were very influential clubs, and it had the ability for him to be able to mingle with the people that he wanted to mingle with. He even at one point in time was like the lead to like the Polish constitutional parade kind of thing. He was like the director of it, and he has a picture of him and Mrs. Carter. And to get a picture taken with even the first lady, you have to go through like security check. Now I don't know really who screwed up on that, but he was able to get a picture taken with Mrs. Carter. And he always wanted to be in areas where he could be influential. And so he made like the clown. He had 2 personas for the clown. He had Pogo, and I can't remember the other one, but Pogo was more like the happy one. And that's the one that would go to the hospitals and check on the kids and be just all around, show up at parties and just be just so sweet and kind and fun and enjoyable, right? Because of the case of the sodomy, he was truthful when he married Carol. Like, he let her know that he had hooked up with men in the past, but it wasn't where he had feelings for them. He only had feelings for like his ex-wife and Carol, you know, the women that he had had an emotional attachment with. And what he would say in his interviews is that he wouldn't find a physical attachment, like an emotional attachment, to these men that he was hooking up with. And that's when he considered it like homosexuality. He considered himself bisexual, and I don't understand. He really, really frowned upon homosexuality, but he explained bisexuality as people having sex with whichever sex and without emotional attachment. Now, I'm pretty sure if you speak to people who are bisexual, they have emotional attachment to both. It's a relationship. Whoever they fall for, they fall for. But this was his explanation. But maybe it was like his defense mechanism because he did not want to be considered homosexual. Back then it was very different. It wasn't as accepted as it is today. And so he felt like it would tarnish his like the way people looked at him if he was judged on they knew like his preferences. So with Carol knowing his sexual preference, they still got married and they still enjoyed a life together until she started realizing that he was just enjoying this life. And he would have like in the basement of his house or in the garage, he would have like, not the basement, but the garage, he had like a party place for everybody to come, and he would just show up at random to the house with some of the people who worked at his construction, PDM construction and decor. It was like I want to call it a handyman type of thing, but they called him a contractor, so he did a lot of stuff. This man was a busy man, you know, being so heavily involved in the community and also being involved in like life and family stuff. So many speculate during this time. Oh, and I'm using the Tarte Clay Pot and Rose Gold. Many people have speculated over time that they believe that Carol had some knowledge of these murders that were taking place because of the unusual activities, but I think maybe she just really didn't want to believe anything bad that was going on, which is fine. That whole pleasantly oblivious, or whatever you want to call it. They've been married like 4 years, and he was just like, well, I'm not really interested in you physically anymore. And I don't know if he expected her to stay married to him. She was still very, rather young. But he flat said, he just was not physically attracted to her anymore, which had to be hurtful, I would think. They got divorced because she wasn't sticking around. I mean, I can understand, hey, we're going through a slump, whatever, but no, he was just like, I'm not interested in you anymore. And he had been spending an excessive amount of time with the gentlemen that would come over, and they weren't just gentlemen, they were like young guys, late teens, that were working at his construction company. And he's just like, yeah, I'm not interested in you anymore. But I don't know. I don't know if he expected to stay married with that confession, like her being like, yeah, sure, no problem, we'll just stay married and everything's gonna be hunky-dory, you just go do you, and I'll just be over here taking care of my kids. Only she can really tell you what went through her mind then. But by now, he was up to no good. It's just she didn't know what kind of no good he was up to. So she stayed in the house for about 4 months after he told her, that's it, we're not hooking up anymore. We're married, but we're not hooking up anymore. Then after the 4 months, she moved out, of course, and they got divorced. So this brings us to 1976. I will tell you that his murders and assaults started in 1972, at the time that they got married. So that's what they say. I'm in the part where I kind of think that maybe they were, maybe that those, it started before that. But he thought everything was going great. He now had his house. He was over being the nice married man. He was just going to go ahead and continue his life as he saw fit from now on. Wife was out the house, or ex-wife now was out the house, and he was able to just carry on with his life. Okay. He just kept on going. And he kept having these parties at his house, and people were just like, oh, he's a really great boss, he's a really great guy, he had all these things going for him, he was always so active in the community, he was just a busy man. Now, for a short stint, he did have someone who lived with him named David, and he actually tried to assault David a few times, and each time he kind of attempted it and then backpedaled. So David just felt like, okay, I'm safe, I'm cool, maybe it was just a joke, maybe I am just overreacting. And then he was like, he kept pushing the limits, and then finally David was just like, I'm out. And he moved out. Little did he know that all the bad stuff that could have really gone awry with him. So David moves out, and he continues to have these fun little parties down in his basement. I was talking and didn't hit enter, so this is the Beauty Creations After Dark pot. I've been using these, I think, in every video because I haven't used them and I really wanted to. So with all these parties going on, John would have these little party tricks that he would call them. And one of them was like where you would try to get out of these handcuffs. And he would at first put them on himself. And when I say parties, sometimes this party consisted of him and one other guy. Okay? You get what I'm saying? And then he would throw on these handcuffs and be like, hey man, let me show you how to, this party trick, how to get out of these, and you can know from now on. And these people were like, yeah, sure, let me know. I want to find out how to get out of handcuffs. Side of it and be like, yeah, look how easy that was. I totally just got out of these handcuffs. No big deal at all. And so naturally the guys would be like, oh, I can do that too. And would put on the handcuffs. Willingly put on these handcuffs. And then, well, John had them, right? Because they were like, okay, what's the secret? Ha ha ha. What's the secret of getting out? He goes, you have to have the key. And he's like, holds up the key. Cheater, cheater. Can you say? So anyways, John, Mr. Cheater, would then assault them. And now we're on to the LA Girl line art. So once he had them in the handcuffs, he was like, he would assault them, and either he would let them go or he would murder them, which in that he would show quote unquote another party trick, which was one where the rope would be on slip knots and would be put around the person's neck and eventually strangle them to death. We're going to go ahead and use the Pure Correcting Primer. So these were not just the only parties that he would have. This was just like, he wasn't a one-trick pony. He actually would continue to have these types of parties. And I say parties, and yes, sometimes they really were parties where there were multiple people there. But most of the time, it ended up just being one person. And that was John's victim for the night. And there were some survivors from certain instances where he would just have let them go instead of murdering them. That's a blessing for them. There was one I saw an interview for, and he was not very old when everything went down. And he said that he just didn't when he was released by John, he didn't get completely assaulted. John scared the crap out of him. He put like a gun to his head at one point in time, had a knife to his throat at a different time, and just genuinely traumatized this grown man now. He was like a teen then. And he said that he sat on the edge of the bed, the guest room that he was staying in, and when 6 o'clock rolled around, he was like, boom, 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 I'm ready to go, take me home. And so he was taken home, and thankfully that guy did survive, and he talked about it in one of the interviews that was done. I'm just kudos to him for stepping up and putting his words into this horrific story. I mean, during these assaults or murders, or murders, really, another way he also killed them was that he would take the underwear and put it back in their throats so they would asphyxiate. So apparently he had something with asphyxiation because that was his choice of murdering people. He would continue this type of situation, really, truthfully, just at random, whenever he felt like it. He just was like, okay, I'm gonna go murder someone now. Or he would take them out a lot. Sometimes they were like considered sex workers. The real amount of people that he actually murdered is still in question. the bodies that they found are just the bodies that they found. They don't really know if there weren't just more people in general. And that was the Catrice HD Liquid Foundation. Daggone it, I have a brush that I was going to use with it because it's by Catrice. It's right here. It's for that. Maybe I'll add that in. But, so he continued on his little murder spree and his partying thing. Like I said, I don't know what really urged him to be like, I'm going to kill this one, but I'm not going to kill this one. It just, I don't know. Let's try this. Let's try this, see if this, how this works out. So this wasn't like he sat out and just planned all of this. He just happened to have all of this stuff at the house. For when he did find a particular victim to assault and or kill. It was kind of like those random things, like where he could just be driving down the road and in totally a normal, just regular, relaxed mood, leaving work or whatever, and see someone walking down the street, and boom, that was his next victim. That was the person that he was going to be like luring in. And apparently it wasn't that hard for him to lure someone in. He was charming. He was, always boasted about, money and things like that. He just didn't come across like a mass murderer. But, I mean, looks can be very deceiving. Urban Decay Naked Concealer is a concealer for today. So being that he was the talented and creative man that he was, he had numerous different badges, like police badges. And on his car he had a spotlight. And he had a habit of wearing like a leather jacket, which people said kind of resembled like what a plainclothes undercover officer would look like. And so he basically just went along with it when people thought he was an officer. So he would get free sexual favors and things like that, like I won't arrest you if you do blah 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 to me, or with me. And so, when they actually confiscated things from his house in the end, they did confiscate numerous badges of him faking to be a police officer. So it was true. Even though he tried to deny saying that he did that, why you got the badges then? I mean, it's just that simple. Why do you have badges if you really aren't impersonating a officer? That just doesn't make sense to me. It's like, you can't lie your way out of this one. There's too much proof there, friend. So he would continue on doing these heinous acts on people, young men, really, and teenage boys. He would continue doing these for some time. Like I said, his acts started they believe they started in 1972, because in truth, John Wayne Gacy took the real amount to the grave. We're going to go ahead and take it some old school and use some Coty Airspun. Every time I use this, it reminds me of my grandmother. So there had been some reports that there had been a man that had attacked some people, but being that the time frame that it was, and in the actual interview and thing that I watched, said that the officers, back then really did try to avoid things that had homosexual undertones, or even flat out homosexual assaults in them, because for some reason at the time they had it stuck in their head that men can't be assaulted. Okay, we're dropping the ball on things. We're letting people, human beings, be assaulted over and over and over and over again and murdered, because y'all are out there believing that just because a man is out there and they're supposed to be big and strong, that they can't be overpowered by another man. Or even just manipulated by another man. That's just stupid and shallow-minded. But that's what it was back then. Even now, we have a lot of shallow-mindedness. So there was that conviction of the sodomy before, but, people had just shrugged that off, and he had gone and lived a quiet life mostly. Well, not really a quiet life, but like a normal life, and he was well respected and all this stuff. Little did they know. His first victim is thought to be in 1972, and the man's name was Timothy, or young man's name was Timothy. Now, when he was accused of this one, he tried to say it was self-defense, and this is how he said it. That Timothy came into his room in the morning and was holding a knife. This startled John, and they began to wrestle. Upon wrestling, he got the knife away from Timothy and then stabbed him to death. When he walked out of the bedroom after stabbing him to death, he realized that there was like eggs and milk and bacon out, and perhaps that Timothy maybe was just asking, how do you like your eggs? Or breakfast is ready. So John sat down, ate the breakfast that was made by the gentleman that was now dead in his house, and then had to decide how to dispose of a body. This is the Laura Geller Baked Body Bronzer in Tahitian Glow. This stuff is fantastic. So with Timothy's murder, he felt or said that it just kind of awakened something inside of him that he was just like, wow. It was an undescribable feeling of power and even eroticism that was in him. Like it just awakened something else, and he was just like, ooh, I need to do this more. This is where I'm getting my kicks now. So he had moved past the just simple sodomy and assault. He was on now to, hey, that's not doing it for me, but murder sure is. With the other stuff involved, of course. So to cover up Timothy's murder, what he did was he just ended up reconcreting his garage. And so he just put Timothy underneath there and concreted over that. Now, he became back on the radar of the police when a 9-year-old boy went missing, but there was nothing really proven about that. But it definitely pinged people's interest back on John. Their interest should have never let his booty out of jail when he got convicted back in the day for sodomy, which I accidentally forgot to tell you. He got convicted of the sodomy, was scheduled to serve 10 years, only served 18 months, and was out. He actually enjoyed his time. He enjoyed working in the kitchen and found it like, if you weren't on his good side, if you came up in the kitchen to get your food, don't be surprised if something else was like in it instead of like regular meat kind of thing, okay? So he held some power there and actually really enjoyed being the line cook, the number one line cook there. And people respected him. In jail, he also attacked a person that was in jail because he caught them giving oral to another inmate, and he beat the tarnations out of them because he didn't approve of it. It's like he was fighting his own nature. It was just, to me, I'm like reading this and I'm watching the documentaries on it and stuff. It's like he's fighting his own self by fighting these people that aren't hiding themselves. But he was still like hiding his regular self, if that makes any sense. For blush, we're going to go ahead and use this iconic London. Like, it's got glowy bronzers, some highlighters, and some blushes there. I'm going to mix these two together. So that was why he was in jail then. We're way past that now, but I wanted to throw that little tidbit in. Well, he actually ended up now, you know, this is 1976, the young boy that went missing, but nothing was really brought up about that. And back then, police departments didn't speak, you know, have as much communication as they do now. Like if you have a crime in Florida and then there's a crime in California, they'll speak back and forth to kind of try to figure out the crime together. This wasn't really like that back then. So then we're now into 1977. Now remember, 1976 is when he got divorced from his last wife, Miss Carol Hoff. And so he actually invites this man over that he saw walking down the road, and he was 27 years old, and his name is Jeff. He actually takes Jeff and gets him in the car, and then chloroforms him so badly that it actually burns his face. And I mean, if I can find a picture of that, I will put as many pictures as I can. But I felt so bad for this guy watching the documentary. I mean, it was just like his whole face was burnt from the chloroform. That must have been an insane amount of chloroform, or I don't know. That's not exactly my specialty, you know. But not just that, but this one's pretty dang graphic, okay? So, here we go. I've warned you guys multiple times, so I'm going to tell you. This one's pretty graphic. You might want to fast forward like 5 minutes or so, okay? We're going to go ahead and use the Baked Gelato Swirl Illuminator Highlighter by Laura Geller in Charming Pink. So he takes Jeff, he chloroforms him, and he does a number with that chloroform on his face. And like I said, if I can find pictures, I will show you. But not just that, he also beat the crap out of him. And he handcuffed his ankles and wrists together and had him in a contraption that kept him stood up, bent over like that, and assaulted him with a 18-inch sexual toy. And I just can't with that. I can't imagine that poor man. And then he also sexually assaulted him with himself. And then somehow he convinced John to let him go, which was great for him. You know, it was great that he got let go. It's not great of the things that happened to him. And so Jeff went to the police, and the police, again, with the homosexuality, they decided that they weren't going to take him seriously, which is just, the police, like I said, they just dropped the ball. Those police officers dropped the ball on that. I don't care what they were thinking. Anybody can be a victim. Even the biggest, baddest, toughest guy can be a victim. And so it doesn't matter what you wear or anything like that. You're a victim, okay? You didn't bring that on yourself. We're going to use some Milani Make It Last setting spray. You guys know I love this stuff. Setting spray like joins everything together. Makes everything look nice. I can't explain it, but try it. It does it. So Jeff went ahead and just took it upon himself. He remembered a few things like signs and clips of like the highway that they were on, so he knew what highway it had been, and he remembered a sign. So what he did was he actually took his own car and he waited for good old John to just pass by. And sure enough, John passed by and he recognized the car and he wrote down the tag and he took it into the police department that he had said. He was like, this is the guy who assaulted me. And instead of being accused or charged with assault or sodomy or not just assault, but assault and battery and sodomy and rape and all of that stuff. Oh no, John was just charged with good old battery. Just like slap on the wrist, bye. They did not even bother to check into his previous history or anything like that. But it did put John once again back on the radar for some of this. During this time in when Jeff had talked about, everything that happened, John did confess to having some pretty brutal sexual relations with a 19-year-old, but it was all consensual. That's what he said. Yeah, sure, John. Nobody thought to second guess this because he was so well established in the community as being such a helpful, good guy that nobody just stopped and questioned the bad side of him, because they only saw the good side. I've heard people in interviews refer to him having good side John and bad side John. You didn't want to see the bad side of John. And most people saw the good side, the party side, the generous side, the fun side, I'm going to help you work, or I'm going to get you a car, or I'm going to be your clown to help, cheer you up or whatever. No. None of that. Nobody saw the bad side. Well, there's always a bad side. No matter, it just depends on how bad that bad side is. 1978, there was no more room in his crawl space. That's how many people he had murdered. And it wasn't just people, like I said, it was young adults to middle teenage year young men, and they were all male. And so he had to rethink where he was going to continue to stash some bodies, because, the crawl space had no more room, so he couldn't just dump bodies in there. So one day he's passing the Des Plaines River and decides, yep, that's my next graveyard. So on December 11th, 1978, a young man by the name of Robert Peist was working at Nissan Drug. I can't really figure out. It's Nisson, so I would say Nissan, I guess like the vehicle. And he was working at this pharmacy, and he had a little friend there. It was really cold, and she wanted to borrow his jacket. And so she was right next to the door doing the cashier stuff. So he was real sweet, 15. He gave her his jacket, and in her interview, she said, when you used to get photos, you would have to drop them off at the pharmacy or the drugstore, like Edgar's or Walgreens or something like that, to get your film developed. And so there was this little piece of paper that you would tear off so that you would have it and be able to bring it back and be like, hi, can I pick up my pictures? Well, she kept looking at this piece of paper, and she was like, for some reason she picked it up and she put it into the pocket of the jacket, which happened to be Robert's jacket that she was wearing, because remember, he was the gentlemanly 15-year-old and had given it to her and to wear because she was close to the door and it was chilly. But little did she know how much that played a role in the case to help find Robert's killer. He had told her that he was going to go outside. He said, can I borrow my jacket? I'll give it right back to you when I get back inside. I want to go out and talk to this guy, the contractor that was just in here, about a job, because it would make him more money than what the drugstore would make him. And she was like, yeah, sure, here. She took it off and gave it back to him, and he was like, I'll be right back. Well, time kept going and he wasn't back. So Robert's mom shows up and she's like, hey, have you seen Robert? She's like, yeah, he was going to go outside and talk to this business owner guy. He hasn't come back inside yet. And it was his mom's birthday, and, you know, he was a really good kid, and it wasn't like him to, he wouldn't have been the kid that just up and ran away. It wasn't going to be that. But she's like, okay, and she waited around a little while, and he wasn't going to miss his mama's birthday either. He wasn't that type. But she waited around, and he just didn't show back up. So, needless to say, she got a little worried as time went on, you know, as the night darkened and things like that. He just didn't show back up. So she went home and talked to her husband, and they went out looking, and then finally ended up at the police station to report their son. Smashbox Full Exposure mascara. So out of all of his things, I truly believe that this one, because he was so cocky and had been doing this for so long, this was his downfall. This is what I truly believe, and from what I watched in the documentaries, this was the straw that broke the camel's back for him. And so this young man was really loved in the community. Not saying the others weren't, but he had also been seen in the same drugstore as the young man worked. And he is a contractor. So they just started putting all the pieces together. And about this time, there was a lieutenant that came on into the police station, and he was new to this. So a lot of them were like, oh, he's got something to prove. No, he was just doing what he needed to do. And so what he did was he actually took this case seriously and didn't just shove it by the wayside by some missing kid or some runaway kid. He wasn't a runaway. Something had actually happened to this child. And he was 15. He was a child. I know that some kids, I know at 15, I didn't think I was a child, but you are. You're still a child. The cops had shown up at his place because they just wanted to talk to him and be like, hey, do you know this kid, kind of thing. Just, you know, when people are around, you know, a missing person, they kind of start asking questions to those people, you know. Do you know anything about this kid? When did you see him last? You know, where was he? Who was he talking to when they saw him last? Kind of thing. And he was like, yeah, sure, come on in. This guy was so cocky that during the time that the police officers actually came to talk to him about this child, this Robert young man, this Robert Peist, that Robert's Peist's body was actually in his attic being hidden. Because remember, he had no room in his crawl space, so he couldn't just dispose of the body. He was actually in the attic while he was talking to the cops. If the cops had actually checked the history, maybe they would have pushed a little harder and kind of shoved John out the way and started a search warrant. I'm not sure that that's even legal of how that works, but I mean, he was up there. Granted, he was already passed away, but he was in the attic. So John was feeling some kind of heat on himself, but they were like, hey, if you think of anything, would you please come back down to the precinct? We'd like to chat with you a little bit more. And so John was like, yeah, sure, I'll come down to the precinct and chat with you. I mean, he was very, you know, cooperative. And these are the day-to-day kiss slashes in the blessed form. I just wanted a little something on this really extra wing, so it just adds a little something to it. So the detective was not really feeling that comfortable with John's, like, the way John was acting. But what he did was, he's, you know, asking him to come back to the precinct at some time was a really smart idea. Because what he ended up doing was, John got a little sketched out, you know. He still had that body up there. And he needed to get rid of it, right? So he goes and he gets rid of it. And it took a little longer than expected because he was just going to dump it in the river. Well, being December, you know, it was cold and snowy in Chicago, and his car hit a patch of ice and ended up sliding. So he didn't make it to the precinct when he was supposed to. Well, the detective had already left. He was like, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to leave for the night and then come back. And the person who was there sees John walk in, and he's just filthy, just muddy as mud can be. It's because his car had lost traction in the snow and was being towed out, and he had to help it. And I saw the pictures of the car. I was like, did he just back his car up into the lake and just like, or the river, and just like dump the kid into it like that? No, he had lost his the tires had lost their grip, and yeah, he ended up like probably fishtailing and all of that stuff all over the place, and he had to be towed out. But he did show up to the precinct at like early hours, and the people were like, no, you got to come back, he's not here, he's already left. And so John did come back, and he cleaned himself up, probably went home, took a nap or whatever, and then came back to the place. And the people were like, he's just given some weird vibes. So they were like, you can either give us the keys to your house for a search, or we can have a search warrant and we can just bust down your door. Personally, just for poops and giggles, I would have busted down the door. But again, for all they know, John could have been an innocent man. But yeah, so they actually ended up getting his keys, but he did protest at first, but they did give him their keys eventually, and he went into the house. They went into the house and inspected it, and they did end up finding a few things, but nothing that they could really convict him on. They found like a random class ring that had some initials on it, and they found like this little receipt for film. Remember, we talked about that? They just had that, you know, and they weren't really like, okay, we don't really have anything to charge him with. So he basically was just let go. Well, John's feeling really good about himself. He's like, I got away with another one, right? So now the cops were like, okay, well, we don't really know what's going on with this guy, but something is definitely suspicious with this guy, so we have got to start following him. So that's what they did. At first they were doing like a nonchalant following where they could be like incognito, but John ended up calling up a friend that was a lawyer, and he was like, hey, yo, these guys are following me. Can you find out why these police officers are following me? And sure enough, he called up, talked to him, you know. Then they couldn't follow him anymore, but they secretively, so they just were like open about it, like, we're going to be following you around, so that's it. And John would later say like, oh, like, I even slowed down to try to help them keep up with me. But the cops were saying that he was always like speeding everywhere he went, which you would think that they would pull him over, but they said they didn't want to pull him over for just a ticket because they feel like it would have spooked him out of what he might have done, and then they would have been at a loss. So I can see where their mentality was. You don't want to just grab them on anything, because then you might not get anything at all that you're really trying to focus on. So they're going off of like the receipt that they had found that the girl put in the pocket, you know, the ring. There had been some other things that had been found, like that 18-inch sexual toy that the guy had talked about being sodomized with, and some handcuffs and the ropes and things like that. Even needles. were found, but nothing that was so concrete. Even they had a dog inspect his 3 vehicles. He had like a work van, a car, and a truck. And in Gacy's car, the dog actually laid down and to signify that there was death there on the passenger side, but that still didn't seem to be enough to hold him. And I don't know if it would be now. I don't really know how the criminal thing works, but you know, you would have thought it would have been able to hold him. They were able to match the receipt to that pharmacy where Robert worked at. Now, as things are starting to line up, Gacy's getting a little bit more squirrely, which he should. He should start feeling uncomfortable. He made all these other people uncomfortable. He made all these other family unhappy. He can start feeling the heat. So he stops at his lawyer's one night, and the lawyer thought he was going to talk about the lawsuit that they were going to have against the police officers for, stalking him and harassing him and all of that stuff. But that lawyer did not expect what was going to come out of his mouth. The lawyer was pissed, okay? Gacy wasn't talking about, they knew that he was there at the pharmacy, but Gacy continued to say, I don't know that guy, I don't know that kid, I don't know what you're talking about, why do you keep bringing that up? So they didn't want to hear, the lawyer in his interview with this particular documentary was like, I didn't want to hear any more of his crap. I wanted to hear something else instead of this, just they're harassing me, all of this. And it started off that way, but then he took the paper of the boy and was like, this kid is missing and you are supposed to know something and you're acting like this, like you're the victim here. What is going on? Well, then John got real quiet and asked for him to pour him some liquor or something like that. He poured him some liquor and then just spilled the beans on everything. Literally, there was the lawyer and another gentleman there, and they were in such horrific shock, they said, and they were bound by client attorney secrecy to, it was like a client attorney privileges. There's a specific term for it. I cannot think of it right now. But he literally confessed everything. And the lawyer was like, okay, he must be insane if he's going to do this, right? Yeah, has to be insane. You would think a normal person wouldn't just go out and do all these kind of heinous things, right? So he's got to be insane. So that's what we're going to go on. So John just decided to take a nap after confessing. Maybe he had all the weight had come off his shoulders, so he just decided, okay, I'm just going to take a nappy nap. Well, his lawyer is like, hey, we need you to go see the psych, to get to psychologist or psychiatrist to get evaled so that we can find out where you're at. Because even in this conversation, he had looked at that paper of Robert Peist and said, he's dead. No problem, no remorse, no response, no nothing. He just said that kid's dead. And everything else is kind of just, we don't really know what was exactly said, but it horrified the person who was going to represent him. So he wanted them to stay. He wanted this guy to stay. He would have done anything to keep him there. But the cops are like, we can't keep him here. I mean, think about it. If your own lawyer is stressing, you did some stuff. And this Slippy is a plushie by Lime Crime. This one is from my daughter. It's by Laura Ashley. What ended up actually getting John in custody is the fact that he actually was driving, and remember, he was still being tailed by officers that were not making themselves not unknown, they weren't hiding. So John knew that he was being actually followed by these people. And so he hands off some like a little bag of marijuana to a gas station attendant, and the officers are like, boom, got him. So that was not something small that they would bust him on and he'd be out in a day, because back then it was still very much illegal to have your, marijuana in your possession. So they arrested him. And then with everything else kind of trickling in, like the matches to the piece of paper from the pharmacy to the little receipt that was found at John's house that was put in the pocket by the young lady who was borrowed the jacket, and then a ring of a kid who's been missing for 2 years, that all these little things were adding up. There was a TV that they wanted to go look in the house for. And so they ended up going and looking into the house for it at one point in time before the arrest. And like I said, I know I'm skipping around a little bit, but this was something that was right before the arrest and of the weed, the marijuana. John just invited them in the house. He had dinner with them by now. He had multiple different lunches with them. He at one point in time described them as his bodyguards. He thought these people were actually his friends, and they were officers, so they had developed a rapport with him, and he let them into his house. And he was like, one of them was like, I have to go to the bathroom. Do you mind if I go borrow your bathroom real quick? Oh, John's like, no problem, go ahead. Well, the other one was talking to him, and they were trying to manipulate the situation. So this one over here was keeping him busy. This one was pretending to go to the bathroom. So he was looking for this certain TV that was supposed to belong to Robert that they had thought they had remembered during the first search to see, but it was nowhere to be found. John probably got rid of it. So he goes into the bathroom, and so he's got to at least pretend like he's gone to the bathroom. So he's in there flushing the toilet, making sure everything's okay. And then at the same time, the heater kicks on. And that specific smell when the heater kicks on and you haven't had it on for a while, it's got to burn off some things and it stinks. This was not that smell. This was the distinct smell of death, like coming through the vents. And the vents were like lower to the ground. So it was just coming up from that crawl space. And I can tell you from doing clinicals and smelling gangrene on someone's foot, like you smell it the minute the bandage comes off, and sometimes even before. It is a smell like you have never, ever, can imagine. And gangrene is where someone's part of their flesh is dying. So you can imagine the smell. I can't. I guess I can try to imagine. I don't really want to. The smell that was actually coming up from the vents. Because when this happened, they were like, oh, I gotta go, so they left. He tells his buddy that's with him, this is what I smell, da-da-da-da. So back to where he gets arrested for the weed, okay? So now they have that smell, they have that ring, that, the dog laying down, smelling death, and the little receipt for the photos. And so they have all of that information. And so when they arrest him, that was enough for another warrant. And so they get another warrant. But this warrant goes vastly different than the other one. While John was being held on this marijuana charge, they had gone in and started investigating the house more. And specifically, they went into the crawl space. Once they started going into the crawl space, they started digging up bodies. And they were just, some of them were a hip bone or a shoulder bone or a thigh bone or whatever. Finding little things here and there. And then they continued to look. And the more they looked, the more they found. And they just kept going and kept going and kept going and kept going. So he wasn't released on this marijuana charge. He was held because they finally got him. And at one point in time, they were like, look, we've found these bodies. And he's like, those aren't your bodies, those are my bodies. Like, he was possessive over these, like, they were almost like his trophies, not just the little things he had kept, but it's like the bodies themselves were his trophies. And they were like, look, man, we have gone through this. You just need to tell us where they're at. And so when he started drawing this out, he was drawing like they had started seeing, like, he did like a little diagram. Remember, he was a contractor, so he could diagram out a house. So he diagrammed out his house, and in the underneath he would show like squiggles of like the where numbers, and then be like, okay, this many bodies here, this many bodies are here, and squiggles showing the bodies. And they ended up removing 29 bodies total from beneath the house. At the time, 8 were unidentified. And I don't know if it's the ones that were under the house or the 4 other ones that they found in the river. And 8, so that comes to a total of 33 bodies that were found, and 8 of them were not identified. But one of the last ones to be found was Robert Peist's body. And this had hit home for that area because, like I said, that those people knew him very well. This kid was something that, I mean, he was very sociable, very sweet, very kind young man, you know, just in around and always wanting to help out and always very active. And so it just really hit the community hard. And I will say, for the 8 ones that were not identified at the time, there was a local funeral home that did not want them to be buried without dignity, so they offered free nice caskets and headstones for these 8, which was very kind, because, I mean, at least give them some dignity in death, because they didn't have it at the end of their life, I'm sure of it. Later on, as time has passed, DNA has gotten better, because before they were just identifying these people by teeth. 3 more have been identified, and which has brought those families some type of closure. They are still looking for the other 5 identities. They really want to offer them that type of peace. So even in the end of the documentaries that I had watched over this show, they said that if you did know anybody at that time, or have any idea that, or speculation that someone you know or knew went disappearing around that time in that area, fits that description of a young male, that they want you to bring it to them, because they're just trying to identify these bodies for the families and for the bodies. But the gravestones do say, I remember, and they show the date that they were excavated from the house. He was charged with 33 counts of murder. He received 300 hours of psych evaluations to try to see if he was really crazy, and he was deemed sane for his trial. So the crazy, like, insanity plea was out, which was great. He was issued 12 death sentences and 21 natural life sentences, which would have been like, okay, you die, when you die, that's you've served your full term kind of thing. So 21 of those, and then 12 death sentences. And he said at one point in time, oh, well, I killed this many, but you can only kill me once. He was still cocky up till the day he died, which was 14 years later, May 11th, 1994. And in truth, they do believe that his murders could have gone up to 200. But again, that is just speculation. The death penalty that was carried out, He actually went very peacefully. He took a breath. He was injected with the 3 different injections through an IV, and took one breath and went and was done. He was given a way more humane and kind death than those people that he murdered. It is a sad thing, but it is the truth. And for that is the story of John Wayne Gacy. I know this was a long one. Even for me, this was a long one. And I hope you guys maybe learned something or found this interesting. Or maybe just liked watching me put on some makeup and like the look. If you do, don't forget to subscribe. Leave a comment below if you have any suggestions on cases or things that you liked about this video. Also, my Instagram is down below, so you can go ahead and hit follow down there. And I also post random stuff. I post more in the storyline on my Instagram anyways, and like kind of updating on what I'm going to do next and things like that. As always, I really appreciate you guys for watching, and take care of yourselves. Have an awesome day. See you next time.